It's going around on the internet, and of course, it's from California. And the client is the Loudoun County Public School. They're the ones that asked for this very interesting mindset. Now, I want to show how they play with words because I'm from Eastern Europe, and what they consider to be color group collectivism is identical to how my nation ran under communism. Romania is a white nation, so it has nothing to do with white individualism. What they call white individualism is actually American values. So traditional American values, and it doesn't matter if you're white, black, Asian, Jewish, or any other ethnicity, you can have these values in your family, and it's actually very good and healthy for your children. These values that they're advocating for, the color group collectivism, are the values of an authoritarian state. A government which views its citizens as a resource, and they are meant to fulfill the will of the parties. And there are many predominantly white nations in human history that had this mindset as well. Again, socialist nations, and even to an extent fascist Italy, as well as Nazi Germany, will have a lot more of the framework from the right and almost none of the framework from the left. The framework of the left is to empower people, is to allow them to think for themselves, is to allow them to be the masters of their own destiny. The framework on the people on the right is to empower the government. And that is the difference. But they use words like white individualism or color group collectivism to try to make it about race. Has nothing to do with race. If you're a black family, your child will benefit more from this mindset. The government will benefit more from this mindset. Okay, so you're basically using your own resource, your own power, your own children to empower someone else. Now, I want to say it's not an either or. It's more like a dial. Like it's not an on-off switch, but it's a dial. And it's where the moral value should point towards, where the moral compass should be at. It's like, is it better for a kid to learn to take care of himself and his needs? Or is it better for a kid to learn how to put his needs aside for the needs of the greater whole at all times, right? So it's a mindset. So let's look at what they consider to be white individualism. It's fostering independence and individual achievement. And this is something the writers of the CRT really hate and they don't like, is people who are independent. Because independent means that you can now make your own decisions, you can think for yourself. And by thinking for yourself, you can also do the right thing. Like, it's not mutually exclusive that if you're independent, you're not going to help others. But you now just decide who you're going to help because you have that ability. You have the option to make your own decisions. Do you want to help this charity or do you want to help this other charity? Well, it's up to you. They don't want that. They want people to put their needs aside and to help the greater group. And the greater group gets to be decided by the activist. The activist gets to say what the group needs, what the group wants. And this is why you get to ridiculous things that when a black woman manages to win an election, that's white supremacy. Because the people who decide on what's best for the group decide that that woman isn't the best for the group, despite the fact that people voted for her. When a woman gets nominated on the Supreme Court and is placed in a position of power, the reason they freak out is because the activist, the person that gets to speak for women everywhere, isn't happy with the result. Because what always happens in identity politics, always, is that the person representing the group stops representing the group and starts representing their own interests. Their own interests and the group are one and the same. Think about of a priest that stops speaking on what God wants and starts speaking on what he wants, but uses the concept of God as a vector to enforce his will. So even though when you look at what the activists claim and they say, well, we want more women in position of power, we want to end racism, when they actually see a person that's competing with them for power, even if that is a black person, even that is a woman that's going to get in a position of power, even if she adopts black children in her family, even if she does all of that, she is evil. She is against the group. Why? Not because she is de facto against the group, but because she is against the activist. She is against the authority, which now align the group with their personal interests. So in other words, you are going to be forced into a quote-unquote community with people that you don't know or don't even have things in common against for political purposes.
I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2 plus kids' rights.
So as you can see, the people from the LGBTQIA didn't got together and chose Justin Trudeau as their representative. No, Justin Trudeau is using these people who probably don't know each other, might even have completely different views and different lived experiences than each other, but he is creating them into this community that he can't even say his name of because he really doesn't care about the community at all at the end of the day. What he wants is to use the community as a vector in order to gain power. And when you criticize Justin Trudeau, you're not criticizing Justin Trudeau, you are criticizing
LBG.
In other words, it's just like CRT. If you're criticizing it, you're not actually criticizing the fact that the government is trying to enslave people. No. You're a white supremacist. You actually want the white identity to come back. That's how they're doing it. That's the ploy. So it's a prison of the mind. Now, the second one, which is also very interesting, if you want an independent, free-thinking person, you're supposed to allow them to start having some freedoms. So it's the type of parent that takes the courage and allows the kid to go and play outside and experiment without being in the supervision of the parent nonstop. And this allows the child to experience the world. It makes him gain confidence. It makes him feel that he is worthy of having the parent's trust. And he is going to be able to find out what's good and wrong by himself. He's going to try certain things which might have negative results, and he's going to learn, okay, maybe I shouldn't try them in the future. And he's going to experience with things that give positive results, and he's going to say, okay, maybe I should do this some more. And this is how you need to educate your child if you want them to become strong and independent. If you want them to start making their own decisions and experiencing the world through their lens. Because if you tell a kid, hey, don't do that, it's bad, they're not going to get the same level of understanding as if they try and do it themselves and they find out why it's bad. So a perfect example is when I grew up, I think I was 5 or 6, and my parents were smoking cigarettes. And I kept asking them for a smoke. And one day, my mother said, okay, fine, you can have one, but pull as hard as you can. Pull as hard as you can, deep breath. And I started coughing my lungs out. Now, obviously, everyone in my family chastised my mother because this is the type of society that we lived in. And this was what was encouraged. But what ended up happening is that I never wanted to touch a cigarette again for my entire life. And I had a lot of people tempting me, especially at high school. It's like, hey, don't you want a cigarette? No, never. Keep that thing away from me. You're trying to give me death sticks. And that is what it means to actually allow children to experience the world when it's possible, of course. But you're allowing them more freedom. You're allowing them to experience things. Meanwhile, the way they want kids to be raised is children remain with the parents more often, not just in proximity, but in touching. The physical world has meaning largely as it relates to human relationship. In other words, complete dependence on the parent. The parent is afraid about letting his kid go. And usually you have these types of societies in nations where the criminal element is skyrocketing. So nations like Romania under socialism. But when the crime rate is so high, people are afraid to let go of their children even for a second. And because of that, the child is now fully dependent on the parent. They do not have the opportunity to experiment things. They do not have the opportunity to understand why certain things are bad. They are told that certain things are bad and they shouldn't question it. So again, this creates slaves. This creates free people. And the reason they brand it as white is that if you point it out like I just did, and I say, well, this creates free people. So you think that black people are slaves? No, I think that black people should also focus on this. I think every human being on the planet should focus on this. This is good. This is what creates the most powerful nation in the world with some of the most wealthiest people in the world. This is what authoritarian nations want. It's what authoritarian governments want their people to be like. Has nothing to do with race. It's everything to do with ideology. It's creating a prison of the mind. Promote self-expression, individual thinking, personal choice. So this is how parents in the United States teach children. Children are expected to form and express opinions, even question elders. Young people make choices, life career, based on their own interests and needs. So you're encouraged to keep questioning your parents. You're encouraged to understand things for yourself. Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, he should be away from white individualism, right? But he had an interview where he talked about the tooth fairy and how his kid didn't believe that the tooth fairy is real or not. So they did an experiment. They put a tooth under the pillow without telling the father, and the next day they didn't find money under the pillow. So the kid did a scientific experiment, had a hypothesis that the tooth fairy is not real, placed the tooth under the pillow, and then realized that the experiment was concluded. I guess the next step would be to tell his classmates to do the same so that he can get a peer review. But Neil deGrasse Tyson was very proud of what his kid has done. Why? Because he was doing critical thinking. Like, he didn't just believe the authority figure. He didn't just believe the parent. He wanted to see for himself. And this is what creates intelligent people. Meanwhile, what they want to do is that children are expected to show respect by quietly listening, not advancing their own ideas to the exclusion of others. Life choices are often colored by what will be best for the family, and in the classroom, what's best for the group. So you're not allowed to express yourself. This is going to completely crush inventors, artists, free thinkers, any type of person that wants to step outside the bubble, which is exactly what an authoritarian system needs. They need people to follow the will of the party. The party gets to speak for the people, and the people get to listen and be quiet. This is how it was in socialist Romania. This is how it was in the USSR. This is how it was in Nazi Germany. This is how it was in any dictatorial state, in any state where the government has full control over the minds of the people. This is exactly what they want to achieve. It's why the Mao Cultural Revolution was promoting this. This is not the natural way of things, by the way. In association with private property, things belong to one person, and if someone else wants to use it, permission needs to be obtained, okay? This is normal. This is how you were taught in America, and it's how things should be. If you're an independent person, yes, if someone wants to use your laptop, they should ask permission. However, what they want to do is that many things are owned by the family rather than the individual. If someone needs to use something, they can help themselves if no one else is using it. So, communism, pretty much. I mean, we actually used to have that in what they call like communes. But also the building of massive tenants where you had certain things that belonged to the group. Like, for example, the dryer. There was a building in the tenant where people would hang their clothes to dry and you could use it if no one wanted. There were certain other things like that, but that's what they were trying to push. It's like the abolition of private property. Like, you don't own stuff. It's not your clothes dryer. You can't use it whenever you want. You have to wait until it's free. And by the way, like, these aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, you can have a family, right? And you have the family car, and you can use it when your husband doesn't use it. But that usually happens when people that are oriented towards individualism and they are independent, they get to decide that certain things benefit them, and they choose to adopt it. When they choose to stop adopting it, is their choice. But they're not being forced upon. They're not being raised that way. They're not being grown as being slaves. No, like a person that has its own free will, they can look at certain things from this side and they go like, okay, I kind of like this, and they can use it for as long as they want. And when they don't want it, they put it back. A person that's from this side doesn't have this opportunity. Teachers and parents are equals. Parents can teach academics at home. Parents are children's first teachers. So this is actually the normal way of things. It's how it's always been throughout human history. The parent, due to the biological connection and affection they have towards the child, they want the best for the child. And because the parent knows the child better than the teacher, they are able to provide better education. But now we experience something that humanity has invented since the Great Industrial Revolution, something even better than the steam engine, which is that of the expert. The expert is the only person that knows how to educate a child. No one else in human history has known how to educate a child better than the expert. And he knows how to educate your child better than you. Despite the fact that you're caring for your kid every day, despite the fact that you grew up with them, the expert actually knows even better than you do. And they're the only ones that should become the second mother. Parent role is to socialize children and respect the teacher's authority. Teacher have a special role to teach academics, right? So this is why teachers love this, because they become the master of the plantation. They have, as they claim, associated stable hierarchical roles. It's about hierarchy. Notice how white individualism is egalitarian and the group collectivism is hierarchical. The parent teaches the kid to respect the teacher. In other words, the teacher is the one that has all the power here. The teacher is the second mother is what they say, but in reality, you need to respect the teacher's authority. So the second mother cannot be questioned. A mother can question the husband, but they should not be able to question the teacher. Why? Because the teacher comes from the state. And the whole purpose of this is to teach people to obey the state, to obey the government, to obey authority. And it's funny because you have anti-fascists, like they're thinking that this is the good shit. Why? Because they labeled it as color group collectivism. Honestly, if I shit in a box and I label it as cleaning water, these people would use it because they look at the label. They don't look what's inside the box. That's literally what they do. Just the label, the definition, and that the Democratic Republic of North Korea is democratic in their mind. National Socialism is the only exception. That's when they come up and they say, hold on a little bit, that's not real socialism. Don't look at the definition. But everything else, they just look at the definition. When you actually start reading these things and you start understanding what they are, especially if you live through them, you realize that this is enslaving people and this is setting people free. Has nothing to do with whiteness, has nothing to do with color or ethnicity. The same standard is applied in white nations that went socialist, and the same standard where you have white individualism is actually very rare. You can see it in the United States, you can see it in the United Kingdom. I think it also existed a little bit of it, like a primordial version of it might have existed in Germany. But we're talking about the Prussian Empire. They started toying with the idea of allowing people more freedom and allowing people to think for themselves a little bit more. I don't want to get into that. It's a little bit more of a deeper conversation. But mostly this sparked during the Enlightenment, and this also sparked in the United Kingdom, which has the philosophers which created the American Constitution. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.